Good afternoon, and welcome to this edition of the Launch Notes AMA series. I'm Steve Klein. I do growth stuff for Launch Notes, and I'm the community manager for Launch Awesome, which is a community for product managers and product marketers to share the strategies, tactics, pro tips they use to build and launch new products and features. Today, I'm joined by Andrea Saez, who is currently a senior product marketing manager at They Do transcription and content collaboration, things along those lines. Today, Andrea and I are going to be talking about how to create roadmaps that get exceptional results. We were talking about this earlier, but it's kind of funny. Roadmaps are one of the most hotly debated topics in amongst product people. And Andrea has some of the strongest opinions, has thought and written more about the topic than I think anyone I know. So I'm really excited to be chatting with her about that today. And with that, we can get into it. So Andrea, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me here today, Steve.
Yeah. Why don't we start with, can you give listeners like the 1 minute highlight version of your career so far, just so everyone kind of has a sense for who you are?
Sure. So as we said, I'm senior product marketing manager at Trint, but my background is in product. So I've been part of the teams that build Prodpad and Airfocus. Those are two product management tools.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. And so today we're talking about roadmaps. I want to kind of, we were talking about this a little beforehand, but I want to kind of start at the beginning. I think people get so wrapped up in like their religion of like what they think roadmaps should or shouldn't be. And we lose sight of what is even the point of roadmaps. Can you kind of walk us through how you think about roadmaps from first principles? Like what's even the point?
Yeah, and I think you're right. There usually are like two very polarizing views, right? Either you hate roadmaps or the opposite is just being a complete perfectionist about what it should look like, what it should look like. Are there dates? Are there no dates? Are there features? Are there no features? And people get into all these debates about what it should or should not look like that we generally lose sight about what the purpose is anyway. And for me, the purpose of a roadmap is twofold. One is you're communicating direction and intention. So where the product is heading, how you might get there, but it's also a document for influence. So you're using it to influence conversations, influence your customers, your stakeholders, your team members, your board, and you're bringing them along in the journey of how you think you might be able to get to those objectives and what the best path forward might be as you get more and more information.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And I think those things, I think one of the ways that people get into trouble is they almost conflate what they want to communicate to two different audiences, like in one document. And I think it might almost be helpful to like break out, starting with like, what are my goals? Like, what are the kinds of things that I want to communicate internally around our direction intention? And what are the kind of things that I want to communicate externally around our direction and intention? How do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people get so caught up about what the perfect roadmap looks like that they fail to sometimes consider that it is okay for you to have more than one roadmap. And it depends on the audience,
Mhm.
as you said. So what
Mhm.
you present to your board might not be the same type of roadmap or defined roadmap as you might present to your customers or what you might present to your developers or your sales team. Like it is okay for you to have one source roadmap that's for the product team and then different, versions of that, so to speak, depending on the audience and who might be looking at it, what type of information they need, what level of detail they need. But another thing is we get so wrapped up on, what is a roadmap, what isn't a roadmap, that we forget that there is another document, which tends to be confused with a roadmap, which is the release plan.
Yes.
And it's okay for you to have both. If anything, you should have both.
Yes.
And a lot of people are like, "Oh, but I have a release plan." That's what people want to know. And yeah, it is true that people want to know what your release plan looks like, but at the same time, why shouldn't you also talk about the high level goals? What's your general direction? Not just what's happening in the next 2 weeks,
Yes.
but what is happening, in the next 6 months or in the next year? What are you envisioning for your product and for the future of your product? How are you going to potentially execute on that strategy? How are you providing value? And that is the number one thing that the roadmap should be answering is how are you providing value?
Yes.
Whereas
Yeah.
the release plan then talks about, the specifics of how you're releasing those solutions.
Mhm. When you think about communicating internally with the rest of your team, a roadmap versus a release plan, what like goals is each one of those documents like better suited to in your mind?
It depends. The typical product management
Yes.
answer. And
Yeah,
it depends on the conversation that you're having.
okay.
So if you're talking about, the expectations for the next week or the next month, that's where your release plan comes in. Like, what are you actively working on? So here at Trint, we have something called progress demos, where everybody in all the teams get to show the progress on something cool that they're working on. And that gives everybody an idea of kind of what it's looking like, what it's shaping up to be, answering, certain questions about how it might work and how they could potentially talk about it. Like, the entire company gets to be part of those sessions. And it's really cool because, engineering gets to see what marketing is up to, and, CS gets to see what engineering is up to, and we all get to share our stuff. But that is a progress. So that's more of the release plan, right? What is the progress on the things that you have decided to already work on? Whereas the roadmap is a lot higher level. So it's more around, yes, what are the things that you have committed that capacity to, but also what are the things that may be going into discovery soon? What are the potential problems that you're interested in solving? And then aligning with your other teams to perhaps get some beta testers or get some user research aligned. And CS may have customers that they know about that may be interested in that research. So that is the opportunity for the entire team to kind of get aligned around what you're doing and why and how you can collaborate together.
Yeah. Those internal meetings around kind of what's coming up. How often does your team do those?
Every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks. And do you find that gives, because I think one of the biggest reasons people think they need to have, here's what we're building for the next 6 months, a year, is that, I have to give my sales and marketing team like enough lead time. Do you find that every 2 weeks is a fast enough cadence that you can kind of get things on other teams' radar such that they're feeling like things are being, just kind of dropped in their lap? Like, oh, now we have this thing that we have to now scramble to accommodate.
Yeah, I think you just touched on an interesting point, which is time and timing. And those are two very, very different things. So timing is explaining to everybody why this and why now. Why are we working on these things? Why are we committing, that capacity and that attention to those things right now? That is timing. And then timeline or deadline, or, we tend to conflate those a little bit, is how long something might take or when something might be due. And when something goes live, you have to combine that with the timing. So, for example, we're working on a lot of really cool projects right now. Our mobile app went live last week. We have been talking about this mobile app for months, so everybody knew it was coming. We had the progress demos, we talked about it. But then, of course, when it comes to actually releasing it, there's going to be a delay because the app stores, they each have their own progress and process. So the Android app, I think, was accepted within 24 hours. And then the Apple on iOS, that took like 2 weeks. So it was very, very hard to time those, but everybody knew it was coming and we were preparing ourselves. And then when it finally went live, what we did is we had a really soft launch. So for CS and for sales, they knew it was coming. They knew when it went live, we told them, okay, it's okay for you to now talk about it. But for marketing materials, so any big bangers, any press releases, stuff like that, we're going to wait and we're going to stagger it a little bit. So all of that to say that just because something goes live, it doesn't mean you have to start talking about it that day. That is usually a mistake. If anything, give your team a couple of weeks to get some feedback, figure out any bugs that, as we all know, sometimes bugs only exist in production for some reason. So figure out those bugs, fix them. And then once you have a little bit of confidence that it's where you need it to be or where you want it to be, then, release it externally. But while I'm saying that, that doesn't mean that you just release something and don't tell anyone. Prepare your team, have those conversations, have those progress demos, prepare them to at least be able to hold a conversation about what that solution is, but don't get too riled up with, oh my God, it's live. We need to talk, to everybody about it today. So it's like a balance of prepare your team, but also give everybody a little bit of time to understand how those conversations are going, how you might be able to support those conversations further, because those conversations are always interesting as you're having them. Prepare your team, support your teams.
Yes. Yeah. I think I totally agree. I think a lot of companies and a lot of people have this sense that, oh, this thing's going live, like everything has to land at once. It's going to go live. The marketing has to happen today. the press release has to happen today. And I don't know where that comes from. I don't know if that's a holdover from kind of old, I don't know, more like old school, major version release type of, the way software used to be built. But yeah, it's kind of just like a funny thing I've observed as well that I don't really understand what, like, kind of where it comes from, but I think it's interesting. Okay, so that was kind of timeline stuff. I'm curious if you can talk more about some of the more of like the roadmap, more of the bigger product strategy style document. Tell me more about like what does a good one of those look like? What does it have? What are the things it's trying to communicate?
Those are a lot of questions. I could talk about that for an hour, but I think the most
Yeah.
important thing is that you communicate what the outcome is and what the
Mhm.
value is for the user.
Mhm.
So there's, in my mind, the way I like to work, there's usually two ways that I like to structure a roadmap. Either all outcomes. So I'm talking about, we are doing this in order to support blah, 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 but making sure that we're talking about what we're doing and why. So we are doing this in order to support X, Y, Z.
Mhm.
As long as everything is formed in kind of that phrasing, then you have that ability to run a little bit of discovery and not sort of silo yourself into a particular solution. The other way is to write them down as questions. And there's a bit of a progress that you can do. For example, if you're using a now, next, later roadmap, where you're on the later column, these are
Mhm.
items that you haven't really started looking at, but there's some sort of problem. And in that case, the question there is, how might we? So, how might we be able to solve this problem? We know there's a problem, but we don't really know what it is, how we might do it. So, how might we? On the next, once you've kind of started doing a little bit of discovery and you've decided that perhaps this is a problem worth solving, the question is, can we? So, can we do it? Can you do it? I don't know, but you have to go and find out. And then once you're on the now and you understand what you're doing and why, that's when you're at the outcome. So we are doing this in order to support that. And I think that shows a really neat like progression in thinking. So how might we, can we, this is what we're doing.
Yes, yeah. And I love that framing, kind of ultimately speaking to the problems that you're trying to solve for customers. And though the decision to solve those problems ultimately needs to be kind of rooted in what a strong opinion of what kind of value are we trying to create for customers. You've kind of talked about and written about this a lot in a recent white paper around the product value creation
Plan.
plan. Can you tell us just kind of a brief overview of that and how those two things kind of come together?
Sure. So usually when you think about a roadmap, we go, there's a vision, there's a strategy, and then there's a roadmap, right? Pretty straightforward.
Mhm.
The problem with that is that we often go then straight to, oh, these are all the features that I'm doing because I've defined my strategy. And as hopefully we all know, we shouldn't really be putting or siloing ourselves into features that quickly. So what the VCP does is it acts as a layer between your product vision, your product strategy, and right before you get to the roadmap, you've
Mhm.
got this VCP, and the VCP focuses on value. So
Mhm.
asking the question of, do we understand what the value is that we want to provide? What are the value assumptions that we're making? So for example, with Trint, we are making the assumption that people need to transcribe. Do we know that that is a fact? Do people need to transcribe? Maybe that's a value assumption, but what is the value that we're actually providing the user? So asking that question. And then once you have those value assumptions, then thinking about what are the behaviors that you're essentially modifying for the user. And I think that's a very scary statement for a lot of product people. But at the end of the day, all of our products are modifying behaviors
Mhm.
because they are. We're hopefully creating better habits and not creating worse habits. So if you're thinking about creating habits for people, you then have to ask, okay, if we understand that this is a potential value we're providing, what are the behaviors and what are the modifiers? And then working from that and going, okay, if we understand that this will have an impact on the behavior, how do we then track the actual success of the value that we're providing? So it's a little bit like talking about outcomes, but taking into consideration what is the effect for the user at the end of the day. So how are we modifying their behaviors? How is
Mhm.
that inevitably providing that value? And of course, having a measurement behind it because we need measurements in products.
Mhm. What are you seeing that most people in lieu of this kind of situation that you've described, roadmaps that are primarily communicating intention and direction, what do you see a lot of people doing today that they're not having great experiences with, or isn't going well for them?
I think even so, there's two lanes. The first are people that are still using features. Please drop
Hmm.
that. And then the other are
Hmm.
the people that are using outcomes, but they're not measuring their outcomes.
Mm.
So they're saying, great, we are going to work on this feature. We've done, or solve this problem. We've done all the research. And then they release it, but then they go, oh, it flopped. Why did it flop? But we did all the research, because they did the research, but they didn't account for value.
Mm.
So yes, great. Maybe, it showed positive results while you were doing the user research, but did you actually ask the question, is this behavior that we're modifying actually providing value?
Hmm.
And a lot of the features that we release, and for any product team, we get so caught up on, yes, the success metrics, and we're going to move this needle, we're going to move that needle, and then when it comes down to it, we're not moving anything.
Hmm.
And it's because we're focusing on the wrong thing. And a lot of times what happens is we're trying to prove our own bias. So I hate when people go, I'm going to go validate that. Like, you shouldn't be trying to validate it. You should be trying to prove yourself wrong.
Mm-hmm.
If you're constantly, I've seen teams that are constantly validating themselves. Oh, we run all experiments and we're always right. Well, then you're doing
Yes.
something wrong.
Yeah. No one has 100% success rate. Certainly, you're
Exactly. If
not.
you're having 100% success rate, that is why your features are plumbing.
Huge red flag. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like I just had like 10 different thoughts kind of all coalesce into one when I heard you say that. There's this Shreyas Doshi tweet thread that's it's titled like Destined to Fail or something.
Yeah.
And about halfway down one of the slides, oh man, I don't know how deep I want to get into this story. The gist of the story is like a lot of companies in general fail because they're solving a problem, but
But
it's
they're
not
not
like
solving the
the
problem that provides the most value.
yes,
So you
exactly.
can prove as much as you want that the feature that you're looking at, people will use. Sure, but is it the one that provides the most value to the largest piece of your audience? And
Right.
that's what people don't do.
Yeah. Or they'll do, oh, we did usability testing, and yeah, we designed this thing and people understand it. And it's like, well, it's not solving, maybe not even solving like a big enough problem that people kind of care at all. They're not understanding. They're not understanding that, like, what value are you actually creating with this feature? And is that value big enough that it kind of gets you over the hump of like, people have so much, they're stuck in their ways and they're hesitant to try new things. And it's like, you really have to like explicitly I think validate that the things that you're doing solve a big problem for people.
Yeah,
Um,
I'll give you a really fun story. I won't say the company, but it wasn't Trint. But I was working with this company and they kept saying, oh yeah, we're going to build a Zendesk integration. It's on the roadmap. It's on the roadmap. It's on the roadmap. And I kept hearing that for like 6 or 7 months. And then we had a meeting. We're like, oh, we're going to focus on our next integration. And everybody's like, oh, well, it's Zendesk, right? And I'm like, wait a minute. Can somebody actually tell me where the proof is that this integration needs to be built? Like, oh, there's a ton of feedback. And I'm like, okay, can you show me the feedback? And they're like, oh, we don't have any. I'm like, okay, let me go into Intercom and I'm going to query Zendesk for the last 12 months.
mm-hmm.
And I did. It took me about 4 hours to do this. But over 12 months, I looked at every single ticket that included, Zendesk or Zendesk integration or something along those lines. It turns out that 85% of the time, it was them saying, oh, we're building a Zendesk integration, than people actually requesting it. So
Yeah.
they had like their own confirmation bias and they were about to build something that nobody even wanted. It was
Yeah.
just their own perpetuating, constantly repeating, oh yeah, the Zendesk integration.
Mm-hmm.
So then I took that and then I went to our customers and I said, if you could have one integration, which one would it be? Zendesk wasn't even in the top 5.
Mm-hmm. Yes. That's so funny. I feel like, I feel like I've seen that. I've probably been the person doing that before. And I think it probably resonates with a lot of people watching now. I think people, product managers, we're all very susceptible to this. We love our own ideas. And I'll take a kind of wild stab and guess someone in the situation you're describing had the idea like, oh, a Zendesk integration might solve that. And then the confirmation bias and the snowballing kind of like took a hold, and it became truth of the company that like, oh yeah, of course we have to build.
Yeah, and it made it on the roadmap.
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
it was just there, and it said Zendesk integration, but they
yes,
didn't understand why or what that might look like or how people might use it,
yeah.
until, I came and destroyed all their dreams by asking why.
No, yeah. Yeah,
Sorry.
I think that's how a lot of companies end up in this situation where they have a year full of features on their roadmap. It's, you know, there's a couple sales driven specials, there's like a CEO pet project, there's a shiny new piece of tech came out, but people aren't thinking enough from the point of view of like, what value are we trying to create? What outcomes are we looking to achieve for the company? And then starting with those, and then doing discovery around, okay, what are the things that we should build? And I don't know why people are hesitant to do those things. I don't know if it's just that it's hard to talk to customers a lot. It's a lot of work. But I think when you don't do that, yeah, this end result is you got a roadmap that's full of a couple cool ideas that aren't really necessarily rooted or tied to explicitly to the value that you're trying to create.
You
Yeah.
also touch on something important, that a roadmap is a strategic document, and it's a document for direction and influence, but not everything you're working on is going to be on the roadmap. So the roadmap is meant to outline the big strategy, right? Big level items.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're working on things like minor UX improvements
Mm-hmm.
or a little side pet project, like you said, that might actually be really interesting. If
Mm-hmm.
that does not have a major strategic impact, it should not be on the roadmap,
Mm-hmm.
because that's when the roadmap becomes a release plan.
Right. Yeah.
And they're not the same thing. So again, the roadmap is for really high level, really impactful things that you're working on, that impact your strategy, that impact your objectives, that you're going to measure, key results on, and you have KPIs that you're keeping track of. But if it's not strategic, it does not belong in the roadmap, and that's okay. Like, that is entirely okay.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of design work that goes on in the background that does not need a major strategic piece, unless it is a major strategic piece. Like, if your strategic piece is to completely rehaul your UX and your UI, of course you should have it on the roadmap.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. One other thing came to mind as we were talking about that. I think another reason that people end up with these, 12 months worth of features is that management teams are often scared to give up command and control about what's being built. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Yes. That's what I think. Yes. That usually happens when, during the startup phase, the CEO, the CTO, they had a lot of control over what was being done and
Mm-hmm.
how things should look like. And that is okay. That is generally okay, because they have a very specific vision about what they want to do. But as the team grows and the product matures and scales, the reality is that the founders are not as close to customers as they used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And they're also not really close to the industry anymore, because they're
Mm-hmm.
not there on the day-to-day to experience every single problem. They don't perhaps know about every single competitor. They don't perhaps know about what customers are struggling with, because they're so far removed from that. Your teams are engaging with those customers. Your teams are looking at and doing competitor analysis. Your teams are the ones doing all that research. So founders need to trust their teams to relay that information back,
Mm-hmm.
and allow those teams to make those decisions. And it's usually when the founder goes, oh, we're going to do this, that's when things usually flop, because they are still building things for themselves. They're not building things for others.
Yes. Yeah, that's interesting. That resonates a lot. I think a lot of the times what happens is that the founder has an insight that's like has shreds of truth or is close to true or is true for, one segment. And they had success with the we're going to build what I say I'm going to build, a small amount of success while the team is small. And then they struggle to give up control as the team tries to figure out how to serve the market better, how to more accurately kind of create that value that customers are looking for. Yeah, and they just kind of struggle to give up control around that. Okay. Okay, interesting. Okay, want to kind of pivot. We've been talking a lot about roadmaps and release plans in the context of communicating internally. I want to kind of switch gears around doing this externally and really talking to customers about it, maybe even putting it up publicly. And I want to start with how you think about the why. Why should people do that, or should they not do that? When is it appropriate? What's the right context for that?
Do it. That's my advice. Do it. Have a public roadmap. Go for it. Usually I hear, oh, but customers are going to think that we're committing to features. Well, why would they think that you're committing to features if you don't have features? First of all, right? The second is, oh, but our competitors are going to steal what we're doing. Well, again, if you're not showing features, why would they know? And at the end of the day, if a competitor wants to steal something from you, they're still going to do it after it goes live. So that's a pretty useless, train of thought. I often think of like Apple, how they steal everything from Android and they do it 3 years later and they still do a big bang. So don't worry about it. Even Apple steals from others. But to have your roadmap, like go out there. It's the best thing that you can do because first of all, you're building a relationship.
Yeah.
Right. You're building a relationship. You're building trust and you're bringing people on of, what the direction is, what the intention is. They get to understand where your product is heading. And that's really important because you need to consider that if there are organizations out there that rely on your product, they need to know what you're doing and where you're heading. And that impacts their work, that impacts their behaviors, that impacts their productivity. So why wouldn't you have a roadmap?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the points I wanted to talk about specifically is that I feel like when used as like a bigger picture signaling product direction and the kinds of problems that you intend to solve can be used as a great sales tool. But it's often where a lot of people get into trouble and it can kind of be a fine line to walk. How do you think about kind of the right way to do that?
Again, I think that as long as you're not slapping a ton of features on the roadmap, then it's okay. I do want to quote, so I did a talk with Todd Lombardo. For those that might or may not know him, he wrote the book on roadmaps, so Roadmaps Relaunched. And on the book, he said absolutely no features. But during the talk, he kind of said, I've softened up on that a little bit. And I was like, what? But I do agree with what he said. It's when you're on this now column, right? And you know what it is that you're building. You've committed to something. You hopefully know what it is that you're doing and why. I think it's okay to be a little bit more defined with how you're expressing yourself. But that doesn't mean that you should just leave it at, oh, we're building a Slack integration. Because that doesn't provide enough information. And that adds potential bias to the reader. Because if I read, oh, Slack integration, I'm going to have my own expectations about what that means. So as long as you're saying, we're building a Slack integration, in order to, provide you with X, Y, Z benefits, then that's high level enough that you're not giving away details about what the feature or the solution might look like, but you're still talking about what the benefits are for the user. So that kind of has a really nice balance. And I think providing that context, again, is going to help build better relationships. And the example that Todd gave, which I give a very similar one usually, is imagine you're taking a road trip from Boston, where he's at, to Toronto. A roadmap, literally, if you're looking at a roadmap, will give you all the possible paths to get there. But if you stick to just one and you run into traffic, you're not going to be able to take another one because you've committed to one. So a roadmap needs to have those deviations and needs to allow you to be able to pivot to take those side roads if you need to. You're still getting to the destination. The destination is your objective.
Yes.
But the path that you take to get to that objective may vary and may be different. But you're still showing someone we're going from point A to point B, and these are all the different ways that we might get there. And that's what a roadmap is for. But you're also influencing people to come along on that journey with you and going, it's okay if we take this side road and then we take this side road, because we're still getting to that end point.
Yes. I want to go kind of further on that and say, not only is it okay, but I think by setting the expectation that it's like to be expected that your first try at something isn't going to exactly hit the mark as is. It's going to take a couple iterations. you're setting yourself up for success in that like if you just put specifically what you're going to do on your roadmap in like Gantt chart style, I think what that communicates is that, hey, by default, we're going to work on this thing from time A to time B, and then we're moving on to a totally other thing. And when you switch from that mindset to expecting that your first attempt at something isn't going to quite hit the mark, you're creating an environment that allows and even encourages iteration on the things that you're trying to do to achieve the outcomes that you're like looking to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, there was another thought I had in there around being able to communicate more specifically what you're trying to do when you're reasonably far through discovery and kind of, you're actively working on something. Just kind of this random thought I have around, I feel like media in general has figured out pre-marketing for things that are being released in a way that SaaS like generally doesn't do well at all. Like I could never imagine a Star Wars movie coming out without seeing like tons of like trailers and commercials and stuff for it. And I think there's benefit in like people like need time to get excited for things. They need to run into situations where they think like, hey, that thing that Trint is like releasing soon, like that would have really helped me in this situation. And I think it builds excitement for people. And it's almost kind of odd that we had been talking about what a lot of people do is they launch the thing and they do all the marketing for it all at once. And it's almost like silly to assume that like, oh, the people, our customers are going to be ready to like, they're going to have the motivation and they're going to
adopt it day
feature,
one.
like on day one. And it's like, no, you need to take some time to like build some excitement, let it rattle around in people's head a little bit, give them a chance to like run into a situation where it would have been nice to have that thing that you're about to release, for them to like be really excited and ready to adopt it. So yeah, I think it's a great tool can be a great tool to help with getting better adoption when you do release things.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, I wanted to talk about, curious your thoughts on this. I feel like having this kind of public hub that has your announcements and of like what you built and previews of things that are actively in development and hints at future problems you're looking to solve. It's a great like natural place to get feedback on all of those things. How do you think about that?
Definitely. And that's also one of the benefits of having a roadmap is to, ask people, how do you think about that? How, if we were to solve this problem, how might we do it for you? What are you struggling with? So it's definitely also a conversation point for, potential interest and getting feedback and, just kind of, like you said, teasing things to your audience a little bit.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. If we think about, if the point of these it's a communication tool, like communication is not one way. It's
Exactly. Communication is two-way. Exactly.
It's a conversation.
You're not talking at people.
Yes. Yeah. It's a great jumping off point for starting a conversation as well. Okay, cool. So want to jump into questions from the audience. Blake's going to start pushing some of those to screen now. I can kind of read them out and you can give them a go.
No worries.
Cool.
How frequently do you update the roadmap? At least every quarter. So definitely not monthly, because if we're updating the roadmap monthly, that would make me question things. Again, a roadmap is not for sprints and it's not for monthly releases. It's for much, much larger problems. And I doubt that you're going to be able to fix a problem. And with that, I mean, do discovery and prototypes and research and then building it and then testing it within a month. So you have to consider that the roadmap kind of takes all of those steps into account. So I would say quarterly. We definitely look at it either I look at it quarterly because there are things that may have already been released that need to be moved out of there. But yeah, I think any major changes would come at least every 6 months.
Yeah, I would suspect bigger companies might be anywhere from 6 months to a year too. Just
that doesn't mean that we release every 6 months. We're constantly releasing and having updates, but think of a problem like, how might we improve collaboration in a product? That's a really big question.
Right.
Right. That may have 15 different potential solutions, of which we might choose to implement 3.
Mm-hmm.
And doing those 3 might take 6 months.
Yes. Yeah.
Or it might take 3 months. And then we grab the next 3, and that's 6 months of work right there.
Right. Okay, cool. Anna asks, how do you find a good process for multiple teams collaborating on feature requests like sales, marketing, CX, devs, and then choosing what ends up on the product roadmap?
So I like how this was worded, because I would say feature requests do not belong in the roadmap. The way I like to think about it is you've got a roadmap, and the roadmap has opportunities or initiatives that you're looking at. And within each one of those opportunities or initiatives, you're going to have ideas. Those ideas might be things like I was saying, if the initiative is how might we improve collaboration, one of those ideas might be, let's have a Slack integration, right? A Slack integration is one way of improving collaboration. And then from that, you need feedback. Another way of thinking about it, that's top down. Bottom up, you might have 60 people telling you they need a Slack integration, at which point you create an idea and you ask the question, why do people need Slack integration? Let's go look at what problem we're solving.
Yes.
So you have a bunch of feedback that is linked to one problem. And that problem is then going to be connected to an initiative within your roadmap. So you're not going feedback roadmap, you're going feedback, idea, opportunity, and the opportunity lives on the roadmap level.
Yes. Do you use opportunity solution trees at Trint?
We do. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's what kind of came to mind here is like, oh man, a feature request sounds like it's attached to, an opportunity in like an opportunity solution tree.
Or a potential experiment that you might be running in order to solve, a potential problem. But if you're looking at individual feature requests, then you're going to fall into the build trap of only working on feature requests that sales or marketing or CX or CS might think or might say, oh, that's really important because customer X that pays us a ton of money asked for it. And that's great. Maybe, I don't want to say you shouldn't build for a customer that's potentially promising you a lot of money, but you also don't want to fall into the trap of committing a bunch of resources for one customer and then that customer churns 6 months when you could have actually been building or solving for a problem that may have had a much wider impact for a lot more people.
Yeah.
So there is a balance there. There's certainly a balance that can be found.
Sarah, Ruby Sung asks, if the priorities of the product features keep changing, how could we manage the product roadmap better so everyone knows about the latest updates and does not get overwhelmed?
My question would be, why are the priorities of your product features changing? They shouldn't be. So that usually people think that they have a prioritization problem when what you have is a strategy problem. So if you have a strategy and you know what it is that you want to do, you have set objectives, then it becomes a lot easier to go, these are the things that we're doing and why. And when somebody comes in with another, great product idea, that's when you ask the question, okay, well, if we do this idea, we're going to have to take something off the board. And that's something our product managers say all the time here. And I love it because they're like, great, you want me to do it? You're going to have to sacrifice something else. That's a great way of thinking about it. One exercise that's really useful is the product tree game. So the way you do it, draw a tree, let's say on Miro, or actually draw a tree on a big whiteboard, and get your team to start writing all those product features that they think should be prioritized or they want done or they think might be helpful. What's on the bottom, on the trunk, those are the most important right now. And then as you start moving into the branches, those are the ones that are least important. And at one point, you're going to start seeing that there's only so many things that are going to fit in the trunk of the tree. So if you want to add another one, you're going to have to remove one. So it's a way of running negotiation meetings. So usually when I see teams struggle, I go play the product tree game and get your team to think about, negotiation, because that's what you're going to have to do at the end of the day. But if you've already committed to building something, then you shouldn't get distracted by something else coming along. So I would question if what you have is a priority issue or an alignment and strategy issue. Because if there's no strategy and alignment, then it's a lot easier for people to come along and then just kind of, decide that all of a sudden you're working on something else.
Got it. Okay. So Serta kind of asked, how do you communicate changes in roadmap on both content and time perspective? And by that, they mean changing dates that have been announced in the timeline of the roadmap?
So I don't work with timeline roadmaps specifically for that reason, because when you're working with timelines, you're siloing yourself to work in a very, very specific time frame. And the reality is that when we're working on things, life happens, right? People get sick, COVID happened. We didn't foresee that happening. There's a recession coming along. So there's so many things happening in the real world that it's very difficult to actually, be able to say when things are going to get done. I've started doing a thing when people, not at Trint because they don't usually ask, but before they'd be like, oh, when is this feature coming? And I'll be like, let me pull out my tarot cards for you. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't know. So again, timeline and timing are two different things. What you want to communicate with a roadmap is timing. So why this, why now? When you're talking about timeline or due dates, communicate that on the release plan. So you can, provide people with a little bit better expectation and foresight around when things are actually coming. So roadmap is not a delivery plan. Your release plan is a delivery plan. So roadmap is what and why, release plan is when and how.
Yep. And certainly even, on the release plan, things are you'll need some amount of coordination among teams. When things actually land, will shift. I think just being open and honest and transparent about what's going on there's not much to do other than just open lines.
For what it's worth, when people ask for timelines, it's because they're lacking security and they're lacking trust. And it's giving somebody a timeline is this really fake security blanket that you're providing people, because we all know that it's not going to be released on, October 23rd. It's not going to happen, but you're giving them a false sense of security that they can hold on to. Instead, use the roadmap to provide them with the entire context of everything that's happening, and then use that release plan to keep them up to date with the progress.
Yep. Okay, cool. George asks, how can you manage internal stakeholders and keep them engaged, even though their feature requests or ideas are mostly not implemented because they are not aligned with company strategy? Yeah, great question.
Great question. So for internal stakeholders, I would say if they have an idea, have them use a product problem outline and have them answer questions like, what problem are you trying to solve and what value this provide if it were solved? Usually what happens is people get really excited about solutions like the Zendesk integration, but they don't thoroughly think about what the problem is. So if they're not able to elaborate the problem, that's when it becomes a piece of feedback. Piece of feedback is a little bit different. A piece of feedback is just a suggestion. And you're saying, hey, I think it'd be really cool to have this Zendesk integration. I can't tell you right now in a whole lot of detail how I think it might be helpful, but I've heard it from a couple customers. Maybe it's worth looking into. And that at least gives you enough to kind of go, okay, well, if this comes up again, then I have 2 pieces of feedback. And then I might have 3 pieces of feedback. And then eventually you might be able to see that there's a problem. So I think that in product, we tend to teach people how to say no very quickly, which I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong, but it can give off to other teams not the bias, but the idea that all product managers do is say no. No, I'm not going to do that. Or I'm going to put it in the backlog and then it never gets seen. Whereas I think what we need to do is learn how to say yes to the right things, which changes the tone of the conversations that you're having. So again, if somebody comes up to you with an idea and they can't tell you the problem, be like, okay, well, that's really cool. Why don't we think about it for a little while, add this feedback for now. And if it comes up again, then we have 2 pieces of feedback that we can link together. And this may not get done in the next 2-3 months, but maybe 6 months from now, you'll go back and be like, hey, that was really cool. I'll give you an example. We've had this constant feedback that kept coming through from Trint. And the team always thought, oh, we're never going to do that. Well, it turns out we found a solution for how to do it. And we were able to go back to the problem, and it had 77 pieces of feedback attached. Now, the idea was archived because it was considered not aligned with what we could do. But at the point where we figured out that there was actually a solution and it was aligned, we went back, we defined everything. We did the research, we did the discovery, and we went, cool, now we can get back to all those people. So actually between today and tomorrow, we've been getting back to people and closing the feedback loop. And people are really appreciative, and they're like, thank you for letting me know, even if it was, whatever, 3, 4, 5, 6 months ago. You're still taking the time to engage with your customers and letting them know that the feedback is valuable.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. To me, this kind of comes back to the soft skills of product management and referring back to the roadmap, having a good story for, hey, like this is our strategy for the next, X amount of time. And here's why we're doing the things that we need to be doing. Like, here's the value we're trying to create right now. So these types of things are the things that we're prioritizing right now. But yeah. Okay, well, cool. I wanted to say thanks again. Thanks to you and, for your time. Thanks to everyone that came out. Thanks for sharing your questions. Just wanted to remind everyone, these events are put on by the Launch Awesome community. Blake's going to drop another link right now in the chat. If you would like to, it's a chance to hear about future events, join the community. Yeah. So Andrea, thanks again for being here. Where can folks find you and connect?
Mic is on. You can connect on Twitter or at my... Oops, hold on. Andrea Saez, that's my Twitter, and you can also find me on LinkedIn.
Cool. Great. Thank you. Alrighty. Well, sounds good. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, we'll see ya.
Bye.